At this point, we're ready to move on to the main speaker. Our speaker for this evening was appointed as the president of March for Life after the death of longtime advocate, pro-life advocate Nellie Gray. In this capacity, she proudly directs a nonprofit organization committed to restoring a culture of life, most notably through the annual March for Life held in Washington, D.C. on January the 22nd of each year. Previously, she's worked for Family Research Council, where she focused on issues related to the inherent dignity of the human person. She's also worked for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in the Office of the Secretary. She has made frequent media appearances, including interviews on NBC Nightly News, in CNN, USA, and Fox News Hour with Brett Baer. Her writings have appeared in numerous other publications. We're very pleased to welcome this talented individual to Southern Indiana, Jeannie Mancini, President of March for Life.
Perfect. Yeah, that's perfect. Well, good evening, folks. How are you? It's really, really good to be here with you all. It's just a total honor and delight. So I live right outside of Washington, D.C., and of course I have the distinct and wonderful honor of directing our world's largest pro-life demonstration that happens every single year on the sad anniversaries of Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton. But let me begin by asking, how many of you, by show of hands, have actually been to the March for Life in Washington, D.C.? Nice. Hold those hands high. Hold them proud. Good, good. Well, thank you. And for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to come to D.C. for the March for Life, I cannot encourage you enough to do so. Whether it's this year, which I believe is going to be really particularly enthusiastic and encouraging with regard to all of the Planned Parenthood things that we've been witnessing in these last few months. The momentum in the pro-life movement right now is like nothing I've ever seen before. I mean, nothing I've ever seen. And so, but I encourage you to come. If you'll come, you will see that there are literally tens of thousands of people that are gathered to fight for what we believe is the human rights abuse of today, abortion. Right? Well, the great thing is that the tens of thousands of people that are there are primarily young people. They're primarily a whole lot younger than me. I would say like 30 and under. And it is so exciting. For those of us who've been working in the movement, who can sometimes struggle a little bit with discouragement, it like gives you lifeblood. It's so exciting because you know that these young people are going to be the ones who are going to bring an end to abortion. And they believe that, and they will. Okay, so tonight I have about 30 minutes, and if you all start yawning, I'll wrap it up a little bit shorter than 30 minutes, but here's my plan, okay? For the first 5 minutes or so, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit more about the March for Life. Why it began, we pretty much know why it began, but you might not know some of the interesting kind of back details. Where it's come since it began, where we're hopefully going. Then what I'm going to do is a little bit of what Mike did for the state of Indiana. I'm going to talk about the United States. So it's kind of interesting because all of us are here tonight for Daviess County, and then we're hearing about Indiana, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about a State of the Union, so to speak, in the United States with regard to pro-life policy and building a culture of life. And then the last little portion, perhaps the most important portion, is what are you going to do about it? How can you, all of you sitting here, build a culture of life? Because if there's one thing I can promise you, it's that every single one of you sitting here is called to build a culture of life. And that's the only way that we're going to build a culture of life, is if we all respond to that call. So, without further ado, so we're aware of those really bad Supreme Court decisions, Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton. They were decided in 1973. Right? And they essentially made abortion on demand legal through all trimesters and legal in every single state in the United States. So it trumped states' rights at that point. And it was a decision, many call it, of judicial activism. So most of us sitting here probably know that the role of the Supreme Court is to interpret law according to the Constitution. Well, what they did with Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton is they looked outside of the Constitution, outside of the parameters of what the court is normally supposed to be doing, and created a so-called right to abortion. So it was bad law that was decided at that point, and because of that, many people thought that it would be quickly corrected, right? How long would this stay in the books? So the following year, January 22nd came, and a couple months leading up to that, a few pro-life leaders, including Nellie Gray, the foundress of the March for Life, gathered in her DC townhouse and talked about how they were going to make this moment go noticed. You know, they wanted it to be on people's radar. We are not okay with abortion. We are not okay with it. So they gathered in front of the Capitol on that anniversary, and in Washington, D.C., historically, January, and especially January 22nd that week, is the coldest week of the year in Washington. It's nothing to you Indiana people, I'm sure, but in D.C., it's typically in the 20s and the 30s with low wind chills. Well, that particular day was in the 70s. I think it's like the only time ever, and it was right on the Capitol. They had lots of legislators involved, not too many young people involved, and that became the first annual March for Life. They thought it would be the only March for Life. They never anticipated that they'd keep this thing going because they thought they wouldn't need to. They thought that that court case would be corrected, right? So then the next year came, and guess what? The other side was saying, they're going to get used to abortion. They're going to get desensitized to this whole thing. And you know what? That's not what happened. The March for Life got bigger. And then the next year came. Sadly, Roe versus Wade, Doe versus Bolton, still in the books. It got bigger and bigger and bigger. And alongside what was happening is public opinion polls were changing and growing. And these were, you know, in the 70s and then the 80s and then the early 90s. So public opinion in terms of abortion went up and up and up. In other words, more and more people were becoming pro-choice, 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 pro-choice around the country until right around the mid-90s, when people were starting to see the ramifications of abortion. Women were starting to regret having made that decision. And let me pause for just a brief moment, because I know that even in a beautiful state like Indiana, that there are people sitting here tonight that have been involved in an abortion decision, and I just want to say that there's always hope and healing. If you know of anyone who is struggling with a lack of mercy, there's always hope and healing. You could talk to me afterwards, and I can tell you about some wonderful organizations. It's really important that anytime we talk about abortion, we're really cognizant that we are living in a culture of walking wounded, right? Because what happens when someone chooses abortion is that, as I saw on one of the pro-life signs today as I was driving here, and I was so impressed as I saw the 5 signs, abortion takes the life of one and it wounds the life of another, right? So we know that. Now, so back to the March for Life. So opinion polls are changing. A little too close to the microphone here. More and more people are becoming pro-choice. The numbers of abortions are going up. And then what we see is right around the beginning of the 90s, those pro-choicers sort of level off. And more people start becoming pro-life. The number of abortions start leveling off as well. I mean, at this point, they've grown and grown and grown and grown, and it's really horrendous, but they start a downward tick. And I think it's probably because our country started realizing what a terrible product abortion is, the truth about abortion. The March for Life was growing. And in that time frame, in the mid-90s, is when it became, the demographics got really young. More and more young people were coming to the March for Life, to the point where now it's like busloads of kids come in. I'm sure busloads come from Indiana, and it's so exciting. I mean, it's just really exciting because they are the future of the pro-life movement. So fast forward to August 2012, we were so sad to lose our foundress, Nellie Gray. Nellie is just an amazing hero of the pro-life movement. She retired from her federal career as an attorney for the government when Roe versus Wade happened, and she decided to dedicate her entire life to the March for Life. She never took a salary from the march. She did it all out of her Capitol Hill townhouse, and she died at the age of 88, and her last recorded conversation was about the March for Life. She never married. She was all about the March for Life. She lived, breathed, slept the March for Life. And it's really only by standing on the foundation that Nellie built with the March for Life that we're able to do what we do now. Because in the last few years, we've been able to do a lot more. And I'd like to be able to just share for a minute or two some of the neat things that we're doing. So in 2012, I had the honor of being asked to take over the March for Life. It wasn't something I necessarily wanted, but I sensed it was a call from God, and so I responded in a lot of humility. And day in and day out, it's still something that it's like, you know, you're really praying for discernment all the time, because it's a pretty enormous responsibility, especially for somebody who's not a very good event planner. I think God could have chosen somebody better equipped for the job. But so we have done a few things with the March for Life. We've grown from Sweet Nellie, who doesn't take a salary, to a staff of 6. And we work really hard, day in and day out. So in addition to the March for Life and all of the events around the time of the March for Life, we do a few things year-round, mainly 3. One is we are extremely involved on the Hill, legislatively. And the reason that we are involved on the Hill is that we want to take the voice of the tens of thousands of Americans that are represented at the March for Life every year and bring that voice to Capitol Hill day in and day out. So we heard about the 5 bills that got passed into law here, which is like a record in the states. That's amazing. Well, another record is at the federal level this year. The House made 5 pro-life votes. Pretty sure they've never done that before. Now, what would really be great is then if the Senate voted on them, passed them, and then the president actually signed them into law. And unfortunately, that's not happening right now, hopefully in the next administration. And we'll talk about that in a minute, the importance of voting. We also do digital media, and that's especially because we're working with young people very much. We engage young people, and so day in and day out, we're on Facebook, Twitter. I just found out today before I came over here that we have the largest following on Instagram of any pro-life organization. So that's posting pictures. So if you don't follow us on Instagram, please be sure to do it. We're trying to educate the public about the beauty of life issues through digital media. And then the last thing we do is a lot of just mainstream communication. So just in this week alone, we had BBC in our office interviewing us, or Al Jazeera interviewing us on the Planned Parenthood issues, and lots of other things. So this is what we're doing. A lot of times we're asked, why are you still marching? Because Roe isn't ever going to be changed. Well, the truth of the matter is, we're actually marching for a much more lofty goal. We are marching for that time when no woman in her right mind would ever choose abortion. That's the much more important thing. Culture is really like more important than politics. I mean, they're both really important, but culture is upstream of politics. We see laws that reflect what's happening in culture, and the laws are enormously important. But what's more important is changing hearts and minds. Changing hearts and minds so that no woman would ever make such a terrible decision as that. She'd never be put into that position and want to make such a decision as that. So that's pretty much the March for Life, okay? Now some segueing here, just a little bit of data about what's going on in the United States. So a few hard numbers to take in, and anytime that we're talking about data and statistics, it's really important to remember that we're talking about unique human lives. I see a few beautiful babies around here, and that's who we're talking about. We're talking about Cedric and all of the lovely little baby that just started crying a little bit. That's so beautiful over there. 56 plus, upward of 56 million Americans have been lost to abortion since Roe versus Wade was decided. 56 million of our fellow Americans are not with us, which is just heartbreaking. 1.1 million every year in our country. We are losing 1.1 million Americans every year to abortion. And that is going down, which is great. Like Mike said, in the state of Indiana, things are going down, and nationwide they're going down. But I think all of us can agree 1.1 million is just, you don't even want to say that number out loud. It's so horrific. Any abortion is one too many, but to talk about millions of abortions in our country is just, it's sickening. Who gets abortions in the United States? To watch TV, you'd have a certain idea that it's a very specific population, or that they're safe, legal, and rare, etc. It's not true. It's not true. So white Caucasian women account for about 36% of abortions in the United States. African American women account for about 30% of abortions in the United States. This is really important because African American women account for only 12.6% of the population. African Americans account for 12.6% of the population, but African American women make up the large percentage of abortions, 30%. So to break that down for some of the urban areas, in a city like New York City, it's more likely that a black baby will be aborted than brought to term. 6 out of 10 black babies in New York City are aborted. So for certain populations, it's highly disproportionately targeted. Hispanic women in the United States make up 25% of abortions, but only 16% of the population. And women of other races account for 9%. So African American and Latino Hispanic women have a much, much higher percentage of abortions. Another population that's targeted, which Mike referred to, are babies that receive a poor prenatal diagnosis. And I won't go into too much of the data about that. And I didn't know about the wonderful law that was passed here. I'm so excited to hear that. Our theme for the March for Life this past year was Every Life is a Gift. And the subtle underlying theme was actually babies who receive a poor prenatal diagnosis in particular, because Down's babies are aborted at such a disproportionate rate. I've heard 85%. So, I mean, we're eradicating an entire population of people because they're not, quote unquote, perfect, right? I'm not sure if any of you sitting here is perfect, but I think most human beings aren't really perfect. And we are eradicating an entire population of people for this. A little bit about why women abort. And these reasons I've taken from the Guttmacher Institute, it was originally founded as the research arm of Planned Parenthood. They're now officially separated, but this is coming from the abortion industry, these reasons. 92% of abortions are done on healthy women to healthy babies. So the large majority of women are getting abortions, are healthy, and they have healthy babies. 25% decide to have an abortion because they're not ready for another child or the timing is wrong. 23% because of financial reasons. 19% say they've completed their childbearing. 8% don't want to be a single mother or are having relationship problems. 6% is other, and that had no further explanation. 7% too young. 4% would interfere with education or career plans. 4% physical problems with my health. 3% possible physical problems affecting the health of the baby. 0.5% husband or partner wants me to have an abortion. 0.5% victim of rape. 0.5% result of incest. Sometimes we're hearing about those extreme scenarios, which again, any abortion is one too many, and that's a whole other topic, but they are very few and very rare. And the large majority of populations are done on healthy women with healthy babies. And I think that's important to kind of take that conversation back when we're asked some of these questions. Let's see. So those are some hard things to hear, but let's talk a little bit about some of the good news happening in our country right now. I mentioned public opinion, how it's changed a little bit over the years. Well, the great news is as abortions become older and older and people have had this experience with how terrible it is, more and more people have become pro-life. So for the last few years, we're almost equal. We've upticked. We were a little higher for a while, and then it's probably just really fair to say we're about equal. And I think we're going up. So in other words, for the last few years, as many Americans are pro-choice as there are pro-life. Now, in Indiana, that might sound crazy to you because it seems like everybody in Indiana is pro-life, and that is incredible. But as you know, that's not the case everywhere else around the country. I mean, for me, my husband is an attorney, and when I even speak with people in his practice about what I do, it's like they look at me like I'm crazy. It's really sad, but a lot of people just don't see reality as it really is. So it's wonderful, though, that we are seeing somewhat of a change in public opinion. It's going up and up. Another one, and it was exemplified so beautifully in Indiana, is the influx of state laws. So we're having lots of bills introduced on the federal level, as I mentioned before. Sadly, not too many are actually being enacted into law because of the president, because of the makeup of Senate, etc. We have to keep fighting for that. But at the state level, we've had more laws passed in the last few years than ever in the history of our country. These are common sense laws. Mike flesh them out really well, what's happening in Indiana, so I won't go into that, but I'll just suffice it to say these are no-brainer laws that most people would agree are just a really good idea for people. So that's been really incredible to see. Another wonderful, wonderful thing is just that young people are increasingly pro-life. Anyone who attends March knows this, as I mentioned before. There was a wonderful story, this is going back now a few years, but the former head of NARAL, Pro-Choice America, which is one of the major abortion organizations in our country, her name was Nancy Keenan, and she somehow, I think she was on her way to work or something, but somehow tripped upon the March for Life one day and was overwhelmed by the young people, and I mean, bad media moment for her, because she literally was quoted as saying, I just thought, my gosh, they're so young, there are so many of them, and they're so young, and they just keep coming and coming and coming. And she resigned from her job, because isn't that fantastic? And she resigned from her job because she conceded that they couldn't recruit young people. And she thought that what they really needed to do was have better marketing, that they should hire a younger president of NARAL. What she didn't realize was that it wasn't the marketing that had a problem, it was the product that she was trying to sell. But wonderfully, young people knew that. Other wonderful examples of young, courageous people that are building a culture of life, this is David Daleiden, the guy behind these Planned Parenthood videos. I mean, what a young little not that he's in his 20s, but what a courageous guy. I mean, out of the blue, years ago I had spoken with him when he was working for the organization Live Action, and there's another one, Lila Rose, Students for Life, but we've got so many really smart, really excited young people, and it should give us all a lot of hope. Students for Life of America is amazing. I mean, they're this force that is to be reckoned with. They're so fun. Anytime I have the opportunity to speak to Students for Life, it's like these groups just grow and grow and grow, and they're on every college campus, and they're so enthusiastic. So we have a lot to be hopeful for. Pregnancy Resource Centers, another huge light in the pro-life movement. As you all know, with your pregnancy center here, there are more pregnancy centers in our country than there are abortion clinics. Far more pregnancy centers. There's something like, it's upwards of 2,000. It's over 2,000, and abortion clinics is definitely under 1,000. I know Planned Parenthood clinics is about 700. I believe abortion clinics is close to 700. And pregnancy centers, as you know, provide emotional, spiritual, and physical support for women and families facing unexpected pregnancies. So that's a little bit of a state of the states. I would like to change now, just for my last few minutes, to talk a little bit about your role in getting those bright spots to become even brighter, right? So that our state of the states is even brighter, that we have more good news stories. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to just speak, hopefully by way of analogy, about an experience that I had, a little story, and then I'm actually just going to share a few other stories of people that I know that have just been so wonderful in this movement. But I'm Catholic. I know that we've got a variety of people of different religious backgrounds here, but in the Catholic faith in Washington, D.C., we have this wonderful around the world, there's a wonderful liturgical season where we've got Lent, and then, of course, Easter. And so Lent is the 40 days in preparation for the great feast of the resurrection of our Lord, which goes on for 50 days. Well, in D.C., there's this wonderful cathedral, St. Matthew's Cathedral, and they do a service during Holy Week, right before Easter. The holiest week of the year is what we say, and you're really entering into the Lord's Passion. And the service is called Tenebrae. And the service actually, that word, tenebrae, it actually means shadows, like darkness. And so anybody who's ever been to St. Matt's, which I'm guessing not too many people here have, but it's enormous. It's a little bit bigger than this room, and it's beautiful and old. And during the Tenebrae service, what they do is they have what's called a candelabre, so it's like a candle holder for 8 candles or 9 candles that's lit at the very front of the church, and then they shut off all of the rest of the lights. It's very moving in terms of just the lighting of it all. And they're reading the Lamentations and the Psalms from scriptures, and it's very moving. And then one by one, they snuff out each of the candles that are lit on the candelabra until there's only one candle lit. And it's very stark in this church that's so dark. And there are so many people there, and there's kind of this stillness. And then they snuff out that last candle. And it's reflective of what our Lord goes through in the passion and death before the resurrection. And it's hard. I mean, there's a sadness there, as you're going through that. And then they come back and light one candle, the Christ candle, and it's a little bit brighter. And I had, I think, an inspiration when I went to this a few years ago, because that one candle, when they lit it back, the difference between when it wasn't lit and when it was lit was remarkable. I mean, the entire church, which is so enormous, was black when it wasn't lit. And then that one candle at the front of the church, so picture like up here, one candle and maybe about 2 times as big as this place, it's all black. That one candle made a huge difference. Like everything was a little bit more lit because of that one candle. And I think what was a little inspiration, that's what it's like for each of us in building a culture of life. It might feel pretty dark around us with some of the different things that are happening in our culture. And frankly, our little candle, it might not feel like much. But what I would offer is that every single one of us, to the extent that we're open to being that light, that candle, that we have that capacity to influence the world around us, just as that little candle analogously influenced the church, the big dark church. And so how? How are we called to do that? Well, we're all called in very, very different ways, and I think only you can answer that question. But we're all called, and that is for certain. So in whatever your age is, we're called. Whether you're young, whether you're a grandma, a grandpa, there's still calls there at all different seasons of life, and often they make us a little uncomfortable. So I'm just going to finish now by sharing a few of these neat stories that I've heard along the way of people who've responded to the call and have built a culture of life in their own unique way. One is, you may even know this lady. One is a woman by the name of Sylvia Slifko, who would be of the grandmotherly season in life. And she's a beautiful woman of faith who lives in Ohio. She used to help run a pregnancy center with her husband. But she got really frustrated because they were never seeing abortion-minded women at the pregnancy center. And she prayed about this, really, really prayed from her heart. And she got this kind of crazy idea in her mind to start a mobile ultrasound unit and bring it in front of the abortion clinic and then offer free ultrasounds for women. And she really sort of felt inspired about this and then thought, how could I ever do this? I don't have a medical background, I don't have a truck, I don't know how I'm going to do this. Well, within 6 months, she had kind of a bus that was donated that they could use for it. She had a retired doctor agree to be the medical oversight for the whole thing, and she had the funding for it all. So she essentially started this one mobile ultrasound unit, which was highly successful to the extent of shutting down one abortion clinic in their town, and then shutting down a year later the second abortion clinic, which was within parameters of their town. But then also that one mobile ultrasound grew to be this huge fleet, because now others are copying their business model because it was so successful. So other pregnancy centers around the country, I think there's like 60, 70 of these mobile ultrasounds. It's called ICU Mobile, if you're interested in checking it out, and they're based out of Ohio. But this was one sweet woman in a later season of life who had an idea in prayer and carried it out. It's a great story. Another story, this one I just heard about 2 weeks ago, was of a young mom, stay-at-home mom, lovely, and really, was excited because she's ready to go back to the gym, kind of get her kids off to school a little bit, kind of get her life back in order. But last year in Fairfax County, the school board implemented this really terrible curriculum with crazy ideas about gender, crazy ideas about sex before marriage, and lots of parents went to fight this, and their voices weren't heard. Well, guess what? She heard the call. She's running for school office now, for a school board. And she's going to win. She's definitely going to win. And I think almost everyone on that school board now for this year is running because of the fact that their voices weren't heard about this terrible curriculum last year. And our poor young people have had to suffer through this bad curriculum, but they'll get that changed. And I would encourage you, because I'm asked a lot, what can I do? What can I do? Run for school board, run for office at a local level. Every single election counts. Every election counts, whether it's the President of the United States down to the mayor in your town or something less. There will be pro-life decisions that are made. I am 110% sure. And also, a side note, and I'm going to finish up here real quick. So I did have the opportunity to work in the office of the secretary, as Louis mentioned, at the Department of Health and Human Services, and I had a weird job because I was in the office of the secretary, but I wasn't a political appointee. So I was there during the Bush administration, and I also was there during the Obama administration for the first year. And if you think that your vote doesn't matter, I'm here to tell you that that is wrong. And if you don't ever vote, I'm telling you, or if you just don't sometimes vote, you have a moral obligation to vote, okay? I sat in that office and watched all of the good things that had been created during the pro-life administration. I'm not saying that the Bush administration was perfect, and I'm not saying Republicans are perfect or anything like that, but I'm saying vote pro-life. Because from day one, they were untangling everything good, whether it had to do with gender, abstinence, life, everything. I mean, from day one, everything was being unraveled, undone, rewritten, redefined. You can't redefine reality, but they think that you can. And I just can't encourage you enough how much your vote counts, whether it's at a high level or a low level. Okay, last little story, and then I'm going to finish, is another woman. Actually, I'll just tell a youth story, because this is another great story. Group called Pinckney Pro-Life out of Pinckney, Michigan. Two homeschooled high school kids really wanted to do something in their local community and prayed about what they could be called to do. And they decided to start Pinckney Pro-Life and to put up billboards, just like you guys have, as I was driving in today. And babies were saved. I mean, they got calls because they were also the ones who answered the calls, like call this number if you're, they had like a hotline number on there, call this number if you're questioning if you should have an abortion or if you're pregnant and unsure what to do. And babies were saved because of them. And again, this was like a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old that got this inspiration and did it. So the call can come at any age, any stage, and I think sometimes we're like, oh, you know, I don't have enough time, or I'm not really supposed to do that. But I would encourage you that, again, every single one of us here has some sort of way that we can contribute to building a culture of life, and I would highly encourage you to be open to whatever those particular ways are that you might be called to do. I think I'm just going to finish with that. I had a little bit more, but I think I've gone on a bit here, and so it's just, again, an honor to be with you, and thank you for being an attentive audience, and God bless you.